Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. I grew up on a really small family farm. We were one of those families that you've probably seen selling their vegetables outside on the side of the road. We had some animals on the farm as well. Of course, my favorite of them were the farm cats. I always loved farm cats, even though nowadays I don't live on a farm. I make sure that all my cats are indoor cats. However, there was one cat back then, Lucky, that I always referred to as a barn cat because she would almost never leave the barn area. I would spend some time every day out there with Lucky in the barn. After I fed her, I would brush her hair a bit, and she was one of those cats that really liked that. I would also play with her quite a bit. I don't think she really liked being around the other cats that much. One day, I was on the way to feed Lucky as usual when I noticed something very odd. It looked as though someone had left the barn door open. It was evening, and no one else was working at the time, so it shouldn't have been open at all. It was not something that was forgotten very often. I went into the barn, leaving the door open for some light. The sun was setting in the sky, so not much was getting into the barn. I called out for Lucky. She was one of those cats who always answered to her name immediately. This was especially true when it was time to eat. Normally, I didn't even have to call for her. She would just come running right over. This time, however, she did not do that. She didn't come running, even when I called her name. I was worried that something might have happened to her. The last thing I wanted was a sick or dying cat, especially my favorite one. I put her food down momentarily and decided to go and search for her. As I walked further into the barn, something strange occurred. The light coming in started narrowing, signaling that someone was currently closing the barn door. I snapped around quickly, looking to see who it was that was doing this. Needless to say, I was shocked when I saw a huge man I had never seen before. I didn't get much of a chance to really check out his features as the door was closing quickly. He was a scary-looking guy who had no business being here. When he had the door closed all the way, I was only able to see him as a shadow. It was really dark inside now. I was stuck, worried, not sure what his intentions for me were or what I could do about it. His intentions seemed to become more clear as he advanced upon me very quickly. I tried to dodge him and run to the door, but he was fast for such a big man. I was unable to dodge him, and he grabbed me as I tried to slip around. The man began to speak to me, but I was too panicked to make out anything. He was probably telling me to keep quiet, but I could not and would not. I was doing anything I could to get away from this man. I was terrified, wondering what he was going to do to me. Then I began to hear screeching noises, multiple. The first was the unmistakable sound of a cat shrieking. I knew it had to be Lucky. The second screech came from the man who was holding me. He released his grip upon me, and I didn't think twice. I began screaming for my dad as I ran to the door. I was able to get the door open and looked back in time. I only saw it for a moment, but I could see the man trying to pry Lucky off his head. She must have dug her claws real deep in. I wanted to go back and help her, but I knew she had risked herself to help me, and I had to go get my dad right now. My dad heard my screaming as I ran toward home. He came running out with his gun in hand, and I told him some stranger had just attacked me in the barn. He made me go into the house. I did what he told me, and my mom called the police. My dad was able to keep the man from running off. He ended up being some guy who had just escaped from the county jail. He had been arrested for attacking another young girl, which sent shudders down my spine. You'll be happy to know that, other than a slight limp that didn't last very long, Lucky was perfectly fine. I'll always appreciate her. This is a really weird story, and the scariest thing that ever happened to me when I was younger. I used to really enjoy going through those corn mazes around Halloween time. The one that we had in our area was always fun. They had people dressed up as monsters who would hide in the mazes, usually positioned at dead ends meant to scare you and get you back on track. A lot of the people who worked on the maze worked it year after year. They were really proud of their work and of the maze, doing their best to make it as scary as possible. When I was 14, I went there by myself. I didn't have a lot of friends, but that was okay. I preferred to be there by myself anyway. That was the only way I thought I could really get scared. I was going through the maze at a time when there weren't as many customers going through it. It was a weeknight, so I was able to manage this pretty easily. Things were pretty routine. I still got scared a little when I came across the actors. I knew they wouldn't really hurt me or touch me, but there was still an atmosphere about it that was scary and exciting. When I turned one corner, though, I didn't end up at a dead end. Even so, there was a man who was costumed as a deadite from the Evil Dead movies, with those crazy eyes and facial features. I was a little confused, but I assumed that, since he was there, I was going the wrong way and had to turn back around. When I turned and began hurrying in the opposite direction, I looked back over my shoulder, as I usually did when I was running from the actors. The guy was still coming after me. I assumed he must be giving his all into this performance. However, as I kept going and switching down different paths of the maze, the man continued to follow me. This was not something I had ever experienced before in the maze, so I was starting to get worried. That got even worse as I went into another dead end. There was no monster hiding in that path, though. I turned around, and the dead-eyed character was right behind me. He was still coming right at me, and I couldn't get around him. The guy kept coming until he actually grabbed onto me and pulled me down to the ground. I tried fighting him, scared and confused, but I wasn't doing the best job in getting away from him. Finally, I kicked him really hard in the knees, which seemed to cause him enough pain to let go of me. I got up and ran down the maze, trying to find a way out. Instead, I came across another monster actor and told him what was going on. He dropped character immediately and used his map to help me out of the corn maze. I was able to escape without running into the attacker. I told the manager of the maze what was going on, and they brought the guy who had attacked me out later. Of course, they didn't have cameras inside or anything. The man denied he'd ever attacked me. They made up some BS story about me slipping and falling and him trying to help me up. The guy had been doing those mazes for about 10 years, it seemed, and he had been getting into his role a lot more lately. The manager believed me and told me he would take care of things while refunding my money. I only know a little bit about what happened afterward. Apparently, the guy was fired from the maze, but they never called the police on him. They were worried about the negative publicity from it. And because the guy was in costume, I never had any real idea who he actually was. There wasn't really anything I could do, either, because I didn't call the police myself at the time, which I regret looking back on it. I did stop going to that maze, and I didn't go to any corn mazes for at least 10 years after. I didn't want to risk running into someone else who had gotten that deep into their role as a monster that they actually became one. I've been delivering pizzas for several years now. I'm also a very big horror fan. Over the years, I've watched a lot of videos on YouTube that had scary things happening to delivery drivers. I never thought anything like that would ever happen to me, but I did eventually have my own horrifying experience that definitely belongs amongst those other stories. This happened during a really fierce snowstorm. I had known it was going to be snowing pretty badly before I even got to work. It was snowing lightly before that, and a little harder as I was on the way. Normally, really snowy days were the days that were the busiest. No one wanted to go out. They all wanted to stay in and order delivery. So I was expecting a lot of tips this day. However, this day was very different. The snowstorm turned into a blizzard, and unusually, we didn't have as many orders as we were used to. Most of the other drivers decided to go home early, which left me as the only one. That was just fine with me, but it was somewhat weird being in the store with a blizzard all alone, completely enveloping the world. It was hard to see outside the window, and for the majority of the time I was working, I was just sitting there staring out at the snow, waiting for anything to happen. I did have a few orders, and driving in the snow was hard, so I guess I was lucky I wasn't getting much more. The only thing that really bothered me was the boredom of just sitting there and waiting. After 2 hours of getting absolutely no orders at all, we finally got another one. It was only for a single pizza, so I supposed any tip wouldn't even cover my gas money. Still, it was something to do. I set out for the address. It wasn't one I had ever seen before. It was also out of town, which was a bit of an aggravation to have to drive that far in the snow. It took me a while to get to where I was going, but thankfully, I had GPS so I wouldn't get lost. When I finally got to the address, I looked at the house and wondered who could even live in such a place. It didn't look quite abandoned, but it did look very old and decrepit. There were no lights on inside or outside of the home. There were no cars in the driveway, and no one seemed to have taken any time that day to shovel the snow. There was more snow on the driveway than there was in the streets. Knowing I would have to wait over, I grabbed the pizza and slowly made my way through the snow to reach the door. It was such a pain, not only from the snow, but because it was nighttime and there was no light to see where I was going. When I got to the porch, which also hadn't been shoveled or even swept, I trudged over to the door and knocked on it. When no one answered, I tried ringing the doorbell, only there didn't seem to be a bell at all. I knocked another time and still no one came. After the third knock, I was beginning to get irritated. I went to the front window and looked inside. I was surprised to see the house was completely deserted. There was no furniture or anything at all inside. I began to believe that even though the pizza had already been paid for, this was some sort of lousy prank. It was when I turned around that I noticed there was now someone on the driveway behind me. I could only make them out as a colorful blob in the snow, since it was so hard to see, but he was coming right at the house and me. He got to the steps and was coming up the porch. I began thinking that this person must have been the one who ordered the pizza, and maybe he'd just gone out for a bit before I arrived. As he came up, though, I could see him a whole lot clearer. He was a very creepy-looking big man and definitely did not look happy at all. "Where the hell are your keys?" he yelled at me. He lunged at me. I dropped the pizza. When the guy hit me, I didn't drop to the ground, though, which was a bit of comfort. The man pushed me up against the wall, trying to hold me back with one arm. He was then trying to search my pockets. It seemed, if you've ordered pizza before, you probably know what was going on. Most delivery drivers leave their cars running while they bring their pizza to you, then they can just run back to the car and leave. I'm one of the ones that doesn't do that, though. I turn the car off, leave the lights on, and put the keys in my pocket. This guy must have ordered the pizza, thinking he could steal my car while I delivered to the empty home. No, I didn't realize that right then. I was too panicked and tried to defend myself to have thoughts about that. The guy was strong, but surprisingly, he was not all that much stronger than I was. I was able to fight him back and keep him from getting my car keys. Not knowing what else to do, I reached into my pocket and took my keys out. I held them in my hand, between my fingers, and punched at the guy. It took a few punches, but that seemed to really daze him. I wasn't able to push him to the ground or anything, but I did get him good enough that I was able to get away from him so I could try running back to my vehicle. Obviously, running in that much snow is not the easiest thing to do. At least if he came after me, though, he would likewise be hampered by all that snow. I made it to my car, got in, and locked it before the man caught up to me. While I was getting my keys in to start it up, the man slammed up against my car window and began beating on it furiously. I half expected it to break, but it didn't seem to budge at all. He pressed his ugly mug up against the window, smearing blood on it. I guess I'd managed to puncture his skin when I jabbed him with my keys. I didn't care. It likely added to the man's anger. I got the car started and began to pull away. It wasn't easy on this street that was so slippery. To my surprise, the man even tried getting in front of the car to make me stop, but I made it very clear I would run him right over if he did. Eventually, I was able to pull away and go down the street. The guy was still furious and continued trying to run after me. He gave up when he realized there was no way he could still catch me. I drove away and went back to the store. I had to call my boss and tell him all about it. There were no managers in the store at the time. He told me to call the police, which I did, and they came out. All they could do was file a report, though they eventually found that the credit card used to order the pizza had been stolen. So it was not able to lead us to the man. I don't know who he was or why he wanted to steal my car, but I'm glad he didn't get what he wanted. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.